Warning: this video contains discussion of suicide, mental illness, drug and alcohol use, and self-harm. Please refrain from watching if any of these topics will put you in a dangerous situation. If you're having thoughts of suicide, please contact the suicide hotline. They really do want to help. Keep holding on.
I want to kill myself. That's the thought that's been plaguing my brain for the past 9 years. One that at different times has defined me, taking me to my lowest points, and shown me just how powerful my will to live really is. Let me start at the beginning. Or at least when I first started to realize that there was something wrong with my brain. I was 12 years old the first time I had an anxiety attack. It was brought on from a combination of general anxiety over life and being full of asthma steroid medication. When I had that first anxiety attack, it was like the walls were closing in on me. My heart was racing like it was going to beat out of my chest. I was terrified. I remember being in math class and bursting into tears because everything was crashing in on me. I was so overwhelmed. I went through several of these anxiety attacks undiagnosed in the next couple of weeks from the medicine and what would grow to be my average mental state. I don't think that I wanted to die yet, but I know that I was scared and I needed something to change. Eventually, my school nurse, who was one of my best friends at the time, explained to me what anxiety was and how it was affecting me, at least giving me a name for this feeling. Middle school was a tumultuous time in my life in general, due to some shifting family dynamics, giving the wrong people my energy, bullies, and the awkwardness that comes with the territory of it all. All of this fed into my level of self-esteem falling lower than any child should ever have to deal with. I hate myself was a thought that I had frequently. I had a perfectionist mindset about everything, but didn't have the work ethic to match it. This culminated in me beating myself up constantly about every small mistake, a habit I've carried forward to this day. In middle school, I started playing the saxophone as well. I wasn't very good, but I enjoyed it enough. It was something that occupied my time and gave me an extracurricular. If there's one thing I internalized about music, however, it's that you'll never be good enough. There's always room for improvement. The transition into high school was an interesting one. I had made it into a summer camp for performing arts, specifically acting, which boosted my confidence to entirely new heights. Being at the summer camp was a completely different story, though. In acting class, I didn't have enough range. In singing class, I didn't have the ear for it. And in dance, well, I'm not much of a dancer. I got sick during the camp and had to miss several days, putting me even further behind in my studies and making me more nervous about how it would all end. There were other artists at the camp as well, including fellow musicians. Being around them was the first time that I felt like I really wasn't up to pace with my peers in music. But I pushed those feelings down and I kept going. I went into high school after that camp and things started off okay. I had grown over the summer, which stopped most of the bullying, and due to band camp, had some older friends who would look after me. That didn't stop heartbreak, though. Petty high school flings in the moment feel like world-changing events, and for me, those events took my confidence down notch by notch. By the time I finished freshman year, I was a shell of who I used to be, and for the first time in my life was suicidal. 10th grade was more of the same. Heartbreaks, losing friends, humility, feelings of betrayal. That year I started to self-harm. I was smart about it though. I knew that people couldn't know that I was hurting myself, or else I'd be sent to an insane asylum. So I did things that didn't leave marks. I'd hit, bite, scratch, and punch myself, especially in the head. These are impulses that I still fight to this day. I still had a lack of ambition and work ethic that carried into my academics. I wouldn't study or do my homework, but I managed to skirt through and pass the grade, all the while no longer wanting to be on this earth. My junior year started off great. I had a girlfriend and I had a little bit of my confidence back. The thing I've learned about relationships, though, is that they can serve as a distraction from what's really going on in one's brain. Every physical touch is a tether. Every I love you can give a person a sense of worth that comes from somewhere other than the self. Sometimes we start to rely on these distractions and don't develop the self-worth that we really need. That summer, I had my first panic attack in the pool with my girlfriend. My anxiety had stuck around and grown to new heights. I don't remember what brought on that first panic attack, but it's the funniest way I've ever dealt with one. I was so tense and angry that I screamed out an expletive and just snapped myself out of it. For the next several dozen panic attacks, I wasn't so lucky. The funny thing about panic attacks and anxiety as a whole is that it's actually an evolutionary trait. Back in the day, we had tons of reasons to be anxious. We had predators and other natural dangers that we had to fight against. The thing that my brain decided was my natural predator was alcohol. I was terrified of alcohol for years. It was my boogeyman, and it was everywhere. I went through high school without going to a party because I was so scared of some fermented grains that I managed to graduate a total square. My phobia got to the point that I would have panic attacks passing the wine aisle in a grocery store. I felt like an idiot every time something like that happened. I could think through why I shouldn't be scared of alcohol, but it didn't matter. I was petrified of it any time it was around. And if you've been anywhere ever, you know that alcohol is there. Panic attacks hit everyone differently. For me, my heart races, I get hot, I get shaky. My brain repeats the same thoughts over and over. Sometimes I cry, and it feels like the world is collapsing in on me. Some people dissociate and start to feel untethered to the world, and some hyperventilate, and others yet get angry. My senior year, a bunch of the band kids went on a cruise together. It had more alcohol than I had ever seen in my life. The first night we ate in the dining hall, I was surrounded by the stuff. I started to get panicky. My breathing was shallow and my breathing was shallow and my vision tunneled. I was at the table with mine and my girlfriend's family, and I started rocking back and forth, sobbing and freaking out. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't know what I couldn't do, but I knew that I couldn't. My girlfriend took me away from the dining room and comforted me while I felt the world collapse around me. For 15 minutes I cried and hyperventilated and wanted to die. I walked back to the table full of shame and still terrified, but I survived. The rest of my senior year was mostly good. I had some very high highs and some low lows, but I came out the other side ready to go to college for music education, something I had decided was going to be my passion. I made it into my first college and found my issues with anxiety continuing to grow. By this point, I was having suicidal thoughts at least 10 times a day and was fighting myself constantly. Depression is like a war with oneself. It consists of constant arguments and going back and forth in one's head. This fight was tiring for me, and I looked for any sense of relief that I could find. Unlike some people who are able to use this need for distraction productively and hone their craft, I found myself panicking every time I stepped into a practice room. Every note I played was wrong and every sound I made was ugly. I hated myself, and I carried that into hating my sound and skills. March 19th of that year, I started going to regular one-on-one counseling with my still current therapist. My first year of college was excruciatingly lonely. I was 2 years ahead of my girlfriend and lived off campus. I had no friends at school, and I would find myself in the basement of the library on my laptop for hours on end, completely alone. I hated that first year of school and decided that the next year I was going to go to a different one. The stress of school didn't go away when I moved. I met some really great people when I transferred who helped me keep going, but as I got further and further into the year, the thoughts got worse and worse. I wanted to kill myself every few minutes at this point, and I didn't know what to do about it. As time went on, the thoughts grew in intensity and frequency. By March of that year, I knew that if I stayed in school, I wouldn't survive until the end of the year. So, I left. It went against every instinct in my body to leave school. I was disappointing myself. I felt like I was disappointing my friends, family, and teachers. Maybe I did disappoint some of them, but in the moment, my safety was more important than those feelings. I made a medical withdrawal so that I could start intensive therapy. When I left school, I interviewed to join what was called Intensive Outpatient Therapy, or IOP. IOP is a treatment program consisting of group therapy, individual counseling, yoga, doctor visits, and arts and crafts. I went for 3 days a week from 8 to 12 for a month. As the name implies, it was pretty intense. I came out of each day exhausted from the mental energy I put into treatment. I know that it may sound silly, but if you've ever been in a similar program before, you know that it's the truth. IOP showed me that I wasn't alone in the depression that I had felt, but no one there dealt with the suicidal ideation like I did. We had to fill out a sheet of paper every day at the end of treatment and say how we were feeling and if we had suicidal thoughts and our plan to stay safe if so. By the end of the month I was there, my thoughts had faded and I was ready to go back into the real world. I went to work for a few months while my depression gradually got worse. I planned to return to school in the fall, but I knew that I wouldn't make it without getting another boost for my mood. So I went back into IOP for 3 weeks right before school started. It worked for a while, but eventually the pressures of school got to be too much again, and I had to leave college for the second time. I went back to the same hospital and joined the Partial Hospitalization Program, or PHP. PHP was mixed in with the same people who were in IOP. PHP was more intense, however, with it being 5 days a week from 8 to 2 o'clock. And it was under new management this time, so every time that I put that I was suicidal on my checkout sheet, I had to wait after to talk to a therapist and tell them I wasn't really going to kill myself. I got frustrated with this cycle after being in PHP for over a month and a half with my mood not improving, so I began to lie on my sheet. I was finally discharged after 7 weeks of treatment. I don't think I felt any better after any of it, but I needed out of that hospital. I had to fight this thing on my own. By the time I left, I was having suicidal thoughts every 10 seconds. To make the decision to kill oneself is not done lightly. Some view it as cowardly, others view it as selfish. Everyone knows that it's tragic. I made the decision after my girlfriend for 4 years and I broke up. Whether there's ever a good reason to take your own life is a question in and of itself, but I felt like it was the only way to get past the pain that I had felt for the past 7 years. I had a performance playing at a baseball game in July, and I knew that my family was going to be away when I got home, so that's when I'd do it. They would come home and find me, and it would be incredibly sad for them, but my pain would be over. An invisible pain that I had carried would finally be gone. I'd be free. I think that's the most enticing thing about suicide. Freedom. Freedom from suffering, freedom from the things that hold us here, freedom to make our own choice. The performance itself was well received, even if I hated everything I did in it. The rest of the baseball game was full of self-doubt and more self-hatred. Waiting to kill yourself is a difficult thing to do. There's a sense of urgency once you've made the decision, accompanied by a feeling of catharsis from the coming freedom. Of course, there was some doubt behind my decision. I'm not sure that I've ever been completely hopeless, but I know that that week was the most hopeless I've ever felt. The shred of hope that I had left was that things would get better and that I would grow out of these thoughts. Either way, the depression overshadowed my hope all the way home after the game. When I got to the house, I found that my family was home and my nieces were over. It shattered my plans. I couldn't kill myself while they were there. I couldn't traumatize them like that. I had to keep going for another day. My family saved my life that night, and they never even knew it. In the next few months, I started dating someone else and had a new distraction. I was able to find my footing again and started to want to live. Don't get this mixed up though. I still wanted to die all of the time. That's another funny thing about this. My will to live versus the impulsive thoughts of hurting myself. It's a dichotomy that's hard for even me to understand. Let me put it to you this way. My brain has 3 different channels. It has the main highway, which are the thoughts that I'm focused on. Whatever I'm doing takes place there. The second channel is reserved for the random ADHD tangents that my brain likes to go on. And the third channel is my impulsive thoughts. They're usually negative and they're usually suicidal. Sometimes the suicidal thoughts leak into other channels, but I try to keep them at bay in the undercurrent of the third channel. I fail at that sometimes though. Sometimes I do ruminate on the thoughts of hurting myself and let them get the better of me. In March of 2020, I hurt myself worse than I ever have. I gave myself a concussion after hitting my head against a wall. I remember being rattled and instantly knowing something was different that time. I remember the pain in my mom's eyes when I told her what I had done. I'm sorry to her and to myself. I was at an extremely low point that night, and I didn't see another way to stop the pain I was in. When I get the urge to hurt myself, it's like it's the only thing that'll give me relief. There's a feeling that the only way to relieve the mental pain is to cause the physical pain. It's another form of distraction, albeit a dangerous one. Sometimes when I get the feeling, the channels in my brain converge into one screaming pain. My therapist taught me this technique called urge surfing, where you ride the wave until you come down over the peak to avoid hurting yourself. It sounds like a simple concept, but it's helped me more times than I could count. Even with years of therapy under my belt and being medicated properly, I've still got to fight these urges frequently, but I'm successful more often than not. My fight to find the correct medication has been a long and difficult one. In the past 9-ish years, I've probably tried upwards of 30 medications. I've tried Prozac and Wellbutrin, Abilify, and Zoloft. I've done gene testing and found that my body metabolizes nearly all depression medicines incorrectly. Some drugs give me the shakes, some affect my appetite, and others make my depression worse. Adderall was by far the worst and best one. It narrowed the channels in my brain down into one, and it took the frequency of the thoughts down by a huge magnitude. It also made me shaky, gave me extreme dry mouth, constant stomach pain, alleviated my appetite, and for the first day I took it, gave me the feeling that I was on cocaine. Taking Adderall was a scary experience, and I had my doctor telling me to wait out the side effects to see if they would go away, but they never did. I felt horrible for the time that I was on the medicine, but it showed me that it was possible to reduce the thoughts, so I kept going with different medicines to find the one that worked. Starting right before I left school for the second time, I started self-medicating with marijuana. It was the only thing that would allow me to be at peace with myself and to live my life and forgive myself for the small mistakes that would normally cause me to want to kill myself. But we can't stay high forever, so I had to find another way. Today, I'm on a mixture of Vraylar and a very small dosage of lithium, both of which are considered bipolar medications, and while my diagnosis at times has oscillated between depression and bipolar 2, I've never had the manic episodes commonly associated with bipolar. When we introduced the Vraylar, it greatly enhanced my mood and allowed the channels to merge into a focused one, but I still have very frequent suicidal thoughts for the next year. My doctor finally suggested the lithium to reduce suicidal ideation, and it worked. I went from having suicidal thoughts every 3 to 5 seconds to having them a few times a day, on a good day. On bad days, they still come pretty frequently, but I'm able to handle them better than I ever have been before. I did eventually overcome my phobia of alcohol. It took me getting very drunk one night when I was 20 at a friend's house, but it somehow broke the spell for me. Today I can be around it and feel completely normal, luckily. I still couldn't tell you why I had that fear, but I'm incredibly thankful that it's gone. So, why did I share all of this? I think that I'm tired of wearing the mask that I've worn for nearly the past decade. I think that I want to let people in and see the invisible struggle that I've had for years. But most importantly, I think I made this to let other people know that they're not alone. That's something I never really had in regards to the constant suicidal ideation. I've never met anyone like me, and I wish that I had. Someone I could look to and know not necessarily that things will be okay, but that I wasn't alone in my fight. So, here I am. My name is Jacob Roden, and I've been severely depressed, anxious, and suicidal for the past 9 years. This is my story. I hope that it helps you live out yours.